A very good afternoon to you. Welcome to What's Not Making Headlines here on Afro Worldview, the show that focuses on significant stories which are often not given much attention in mainstream news. My name is Thabo Baloyi. Now, we would love to hear from you, our viewers, on what you feel should be making headlines. Do call us. Give us a ring. The number is 011 542 1046 to share your views. Now, the first story that we touch on today is Health Minister Aaron Motsoaledi coming out strongly against the critics of the government's National Health Insurance Scheme. Not mincing his words, Motsoaledi said that those who believe that the NHI scheme won't see the light of day must think again. The minister told Parliament earlier this week that he's ready to place the NHI bill before Cabinet for approval and subsequent public comment, but has held off on the request of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Afro Voice on Friday did an entire front-page article on the impressive NHI pilot project in Limpopo and how it has the potential to transform the entire healthcare system. Afro Voice visited the NHI site and found that community members swore by the facility, which provides a full spectrum of healthcare. Now, joining us in studio is Afro Voice Deputy Head of News Kamokhelo Sekwe and Lindokuhle Mnisi, who is the editor of After 12 magazine. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, firstly, with this story, now we know about the state of the health minister, of the health system in this country, the state health system. That is, do South Africans have time to wait this out while this is while we're actually preparing to have this implemented?
Well, I don't think that South Africans have time because, you know, the state of healthcare in the country, the state of public healthcare in the country, you know, is disappointing, you know. But unfortunately, there are no time frames in terms of when the NHI will be implemented. So that means the society has to wait for that. You know, they have to wait until there's time frames to say, by this year, this is how the NHI will be implemented.
What do you have to say?
Yeah, you know, I concur. I mean, there's no time to wait. We cannot be waiting any longer. And this topic of, you know, the NHI has been a topic ever since before even the current Minister of Health was in office. That was in 2008. So it has been delayed for a couple of years. We're in 2018 now. So for over 10 years, it has been something that has been, you know, being discussed to make sure that it's implemented. And it's nice now that, you know, the current minister is saying they're done with it. The bill is done. It just needs to be tabled in Parliament, and the president will need to, you know, look into it. The Committee of Health in Parliament will need to look into it, and then a decision will be taken from there. So waiting from now on, I think it's about to end. We're about to see the NHI being implemented.
Let's look at the doubtful Thomases around this story. Are people right to try and poke holes in government's NHI plan?
Obviously, we'll always have critics for everything that the government does. So, and we don't expect people to keep quiet about the NHI. We don't expect people, you know, there are so many issues that are being dealt with, and especially in the health care system. So we need to, that's why we have, you know, committees, we have opposition parties who have to look into these things and see if there are loopholes that they can tackle, there are loopholes that they can attend to, just to make sure that they hold the minister accountable. So having critics, I think it's healthy for ensuring that this particular, you know, the NHI, this bill, as soon as it's implemented, it serves the purpose, which is to, you know, make sure the people are having the right health care services. So I think it's healthy to have critics.
Now, one question I'd also like to pose to you, Lindo, is what happens then to the private health sector now? Because you've heard the minister say that this will be compulsory for South African citizens. What then happens to the private sector?
I think from my view, everything should be able to go as normal. Even though there will be some changes here and there, but things should be able to go as normal. The first thing that we need to be focusing on is to improve the healthcare system in the public sector, and the NHI plans to do exactly that.
Which I was actually getting to,
yeah.
and I actually wanted your input here as well, Kamo. It's sort of like a prerequisite here that if they're going to implement this whole system, they would also have to really hit the ground running and improve the public health system, which really is in a dire condition. Now, doesn't that put a potential spanner in the works? Because we did mention time earlier, and now they've got this hurdle that they really have to address.
Yeah, the government has its work cut out for it. You know, the Treasury did say earlier that they've allocated about 4.2 billion towards the NHI, so that should be able to help with the improvement of facilities. But I mean, there's only 11 pilot projects in the country at the moment, and that means all of these facilities have to be improved in terms of the infrastructure and in terms of, you know, whatever else happens in the facilities. So the government does have a lot of work cut out for it. What is interesting, what I wanted to say about the private sector is that the CEO of Discovery Health has actually come out in support of the NHI and said the private sector can work alongside the NHI, you know. So we wait to see how everything else develops.
Right, now in other news now, the Northern Cape farmers in drought-affected districts of the province are facing a bit of a tough time. Now, their plight, while recorded in mainstream media, is not getting as much attention as it probably should be. Now, last week, Agri Northern Cape appealed to the public to assist farmers financially through a drought fund that it has set up. Now, the organization argues that the government's drought fund is not enough to cater for all the farmers who are struggling due to the drought. Now, in his budget speech last week, the Deputy Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, Mr. Sifiso Buthelezi, admitted that the sector was not performing well due to the ongoing drought, resulting in the slowing down of the GDP. Remember, the agriculture sector was the one that pulled up the GDP in the last 2 quarters of 2017. Now, Linda, I don't know if, let me come to you, Kamo. Firstly, obviously, we stress the importance of food security in South Africa, as well as, you know, the plight of the farmers, particularly given the fact that the Northern Cape is one of the 3 provinces that have been named disaster areas. Now, given the context of politics, regardless of where you are, there is always some sort of finger pointing. Who do we point the fingers at? Who do we point to now in this instance?
Well, with drought, we can't really point a finger at a particular person, you know. But with drought relief, there has been finger pointing in the province. Farmers have come out, I believe it was earlier this year, saying that you know, relief is not allocated fairly. There are farmers who receive, say for example, feed for their animals, and there are other farmers who don't receive any feed for their animals, you know. Or there was a case that we also covered in the Northern Cape where they said the suppliers of the feed had actually been paid more than the actual feed that went to the farmers. But obviously the agriculture department there denied those claims. But those are some of the things that are going on in terms of relief fund. And I suppose that is why the farmers are now saying to the public, help us. Because if you don't help us, you know, this is, like you say, a threat to food security. Farmers are really struggling, and yeah.
And we suppose there is some sort of ripple effect to this because it's affected tourism in the Northern Cape. Absolutely.
Yeah, we covered a story about the Namakwa daisies, that area. It attracts a lot of tourists, you know, in the time where the flowers are to bloom. But there was a delay in the blooming of flowers last year, which meant that, you know, the people who usually go there in that season, they didn't go. So the tourism department kind of lost some revenue in terms of that. Of course, the flowers did eventually come out, but yeah, once you've lost the revenue, you've lost it.
You know, perhaps I just want to touch on the previous point, you know, and I'm thinking on the issue of who do we blame for things like drought and things that are supposedly cannot be, blamed at somebody. And I think let us look at the issue of accountability. It is always important for the people of South Africa to always hold the executive to account. So for the farmers in this instance, they have needs. They do need for them to ensure that there's food security. Their businesses, their farms are not suffering much. I think it's much important that we look at who can we go to when we have this kind of problem, and the government should be able to come and at least offer some relief, or to at least offer some advice on what are the other things that they can do when this particular situation happens. I think that's my take on this one.
All right, no, thank you very much. Now we'll continue on more news. Now, Babes Wodumo, one of the country's biggest music acts, has managed to reignite the conversation around gender-based violence after it was recently revealed that she had been in an abusive relationship with her longtime partner, Mampintsha. Now, in an interview with the state broadcaster's Metro FM radio station this past Friday, Babes Wodumo broke down as host Masishaba Ndlovu alleged that Mampintsha had punched her in the face and broken her leg, to which she nodded. Now he has responded to those allegations in quite a lengthy social media post, saying that he may have overreacted in some instances, but isn't comfortable sharing it with the public domain. He also denies being abusive to women, while also apologizing to South Africans for disappointing them in the wake of this scandal. Now, Lindo, I want to start with you firstly. Now, Karabo Mokoena was arguably the symbol of domestic violence, and unfortunately that came a little bit too late, unfortunately. Yeah. And you've heard this story. What is your take on it, particularly given the unique element here, the star power? She is one of the country's biggest music acts. Yeah, what is your take on that?
I think it's so sorry. I think it's a painful story that we had to learn over the weekend of the alleged abuse of Babes Wodumo, and it came out in a way that caused a social media uproar. People started talking about it. Firstly, on the way it came out. Firstly, with how the anchor Masishaba broke the story on how it came out to the public, and how Babes Wodumo was allegedly not ready to talk about it, and we hold different views about this. Firstly, issues of abuse needs to be reported. There's no negotiation about that. And I make an example of saying, if your neighbor is being abused, you do not negotiate with the victim. You report the case. There's no negotiation, because abuse needs to be reported.
But one might say that it's the victim's prerogative.
Yeah. True, but remember, if you keep quiet and the victim is, you don't know what are the beliefs that they believe in. Firstly, they might be believing in saying, I need to give him time. He's going to change. He's going to change. The longer you wait, people have been dying. We live in a society where a lot of women get killed by their lovers. Now, we cannot have this statistic continuing to happen. So as much as we applaud Masishaba for having broken the news, there are still views that say she should have broken the news earlier, right? Mm-hmm. Now, this caused social media, a conversation was so broad on social media, with people reprimanding Masishaba and people reprimanding the perpetrator, which is Mampintsha. And I think the person we should be focusing on right now is Mampintsha. We need to be reprimanding Mampintsha, and men need to stand up and say, this cannot continue to happen. We cannot continue to learn about women getting abused, women getting, by their partners. We need to have another conversation after the Karabo Mokoena conversation.
But then what do you say to his response? You heard what he had to say, that things may have gotten out of hand, but he didn't exactly admit to having been physically abusive to her. What do you say to that?
Is
he trying to wiggle his way out of the situation somehow, or?
It is often what we see, you know, in cases of abuse where women are beaten up. I mean, Karabo Mokwena's killer, he's so blasé about everything. It's as if he's the victim, you know. So there's that tendency by the abuser. I don't even want to say by the men, but there's a tendency from the abuser's side to just want to play things down, you know. But abuse is not something that should be played down. Abuse is something that, you know, people should be talking about. We should always be having a conversation about abuse, because many people, I mean, who would have thought that Babes Wodumo was in an abusive relationship? Nobody knows, because, you know, it's kind of difficult for people to come out and say, you know, I'm being abused at home, or do they even define that as abuse? Because sometimes you find people who say, well, I did this so he hit me, you know, like they kind of justify why that happened, you know, or they want to protect the abuser in a way. If in the case of Babes, I mean, she's in the public eye all the time. Does she want to come out to the public and, you know, and speak about how she's being abused at home? How will her audience receive that? You know, all those things. So those are. But I agree with you, Lindo. If there's an abuse case that you know, report it. We cannot be negotiating with the abuser. We cannot be negotiating with the victim, because what happens at the end of the day, you find Karabo Mokoena gone. You find Zolile Khumalo, a MUT student, gone. You know.
Yeah.
I believe we have a caller, Philman from Welcome. Welcome. Philman, can you hear us?
Hello.
Hello, Philman. Thank you for your time. What do you have to say?
Okay. I've been watching Afro Worldview and things that are not making headlines. I just wanted to ask something. Like, what is going on in West Africa? Ambazonian and Cameroon having civil war currently, and it's nothing on any African TV, especially the killings in Nigeria, the killings of Christians and Biafrans in Nigeria. Every day, more than 50 people die in Nigeria, more than 100 people die in Nigeria, and you can never see that on any African television. Now it's like, if Western media don't show what is going on in our land, African TVs also can never show them. How will the people's voice be heard? As I'm talking to you, there's war going on in Cameroon between the Ambazonians, the separatists, and the government. They want to be their own. They want to have their voice heard. No one is speaking for them. The same thing going on in Nigeria. And you can never see any of this thing on news. So this is an opportunity to ask. Does it not worth making headline also?
All right, Philman, we actually do hear you. But why do you think, from your perspective, why do you think that people, I guess, turn a blind eye or just doesn't make headlines?
Because this thing happens every day. Like in Nigeria, they talk of the issue of the herdsmen, the Fulani herdsmen and the farmers, which is not the main issue. The issue there is the Christians and Muslims. These so-called Fulani herdsmen are Muslims, and they call the Christians infidel. And they'll come as far as from north to the east to eat people's farm with their cows, with AK-47. I have never seen herdmen roaming the streets with AK-47, killing farmers and everyone. And only what Nigerian media can report is farmers clash with herdsmen, which is not what is going on. And I will tell you, 5 people is there. Go to a place like Benue State, Kaduna, Jos, as I'm talking to you. Christians are being killed in numbers every day, simply because they are Christians, nothing else, just for being Christians. And you see, these things can never be discussed. Even when you post it on media, they will ask you, where is this, where is that? But the killings are going on every day. There's CNN in Nigeria, there's Al Jazeera in Nigeria, there's BBC in Nigeria. None of them reports this thing. So I wonder, why is it not making headlines? Does it not worth making headline or what?
All right, thank you, Philman. Very much noted there. Now, moving on with the program, and a first for South Africa, the launch of the inaugural South African Workplace Equality Index will measure all levels of LGBTI equality and diversity in the workplace. The news was a big boost for the LGBTI community in the country, but somehow did not receive as much coverage. South African Workplace Equality Index will in time showcase and celebrate the most LGBTI inclusive employers in South Africa. Companies are invited to participate free of charge by completing a set of questions online about LGBT equality and inclusion in their organizations. Now let's unpack all of this. One thing that comes to mind here, we are arguably the most progressive nation in the continent. So one would say that we are on the right track here, aren't we? Lindo?
Yeah, I think, firstly, I'm so touched by the caller from Philmon. I think you can hear from the sound of his voice that this is touching to him. You know, it's painful. It speaks to him. He's an African. Nobody deserves to die. You know, the genocides that we've seen in the past, you know, in Rwanda, and the killings that are happening in Nigeria and so many different countries, it cannot continue to happen. We are Africans. We cannot continue to be killing each other, whether it is for religious beliefs, whether it is for, you know, someone's sexuality, or, you know, we have a lot of issues where gay people, lesbians are being killed because of their sexuality. They are getting disowned. We cannot continue to have this situation. We had one situation in KZN just recently at the mosque situation, where someone, you know, now they are finding devices. We cannot continue to have this. I think it needs to be condemned. The Pan-African Parliament needs to look into this, and it needs to be condemned by any means necessary. I think that's my take on that. I'm not sure if you want to add before we get into the LGBT.
Yeah, this is definitely a human rights issue. You know, the killings, they are just so wrong, and I think, you know, as the caller said, the coverage for that is so minimal. It's, you know, and it is incumbent upon us as the media industry to cover whatever is happening. I mean, if there were killings, there was a shooting in Texas in America, you know, and it's broadly covered. But when it's something that happens on the African continent, it's as if, you know, we just go into cover it for one day or for 1 hour, it's in one bulletin, and we're done and dusted with the story. So the human rights issues that are happening on the continent need to be exposed as well, you know, whether it's based on religion, whether it's based on sexuality, or whatever it is based on, we need to. And really, I really feel the same way as the caller, that there's just not enough coverage on these things.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, yeah, of course. And then coming back to the issue of the LGBTI community, you know, I think as South Africa, we are moving quite swiftly in ensuring that we are as equal as as the Constitution enshrines. You know, I think we are on the right track. I think we are moving, and I appreciate, you know, innovations like what we are dealing with right now, to say, you know, there's now support for companies to come and have their views, to come and register, you know, on how they just have their views on the issues. And I'm happy in our television right now, we are seeing quite a lot of change in the programming, change in what we are exposed to. We now have, in certain soapies, we have, you know, people, homosexuals, being given the opportunity to express themselves live on TV, and I think we are moving quite well.
Just hold that thought. We've got a caller, I believe. Paki from Cape Town, welcome. What do you have to say?
Hi, Baba. Thanks for taking my call. I really appreciate it. And greetings to the panelists in our studio. You know what? Two things I would like to comment on. First of all, about this guy who beaten his girlfriend. You know, it's just unfortunate that Abantu, people whom we are looking up to as our role models, let me just say as role models to those young people, they actually are continuing to disappoint others. At the end of the day, someone is actually coming to say, no, you know what, I apologize, South Africans, that I've done 1, 2, 3. I can tell you, my brother, there's quite a lot of abuse in these relationships. Tina isn't the things that we do not see, things that we do not hear about. And I'm so happy that this particular program, that let us actually start to talk about things that really are not making headlines. Those hidden things we are going to listen to less. But then for how long are these things are going to remain hidden? It is time that we talk about them. Secondly, my brother, quickly, it is this thing, the LGBT group, that it is now going to be hitting the headlines for in terms of diversity and representativity in the workplace. I'm watching this thing with great interest in the solo cause, because now it is actually going to as far as maybe, I'm not sure, but maybe it is going to as far as changing maybe or influencing how we implement the representativity in the workplace. That is, now I'm talking insofar as the Employment Equity Act in the workplace is concerned. However, it is actually not going to be an easy walk in the park, my brother, because now if the LGBT guys are going to say, no, you know what, we also want to be recognized in the workplace insofar as representativity at all levels and at all categories. I'm now talking law, insofar as the Employment Equity says, is actually putting. Also, in particular, when companies are reporting to the Labor Department, when they actually sending off their employment equity reports and so forth, how exactly this is actually going to be taken forward to ensure that people of the LGBT, they are represented. But also, remember that also others may actually want to come and say, but then let us actually take it a little bit further. What about Christians? What about non-Christians? What about those who believe in ancient African traditions? You know, so we need really to be careful as we're going along with this thing. Yes, Thabo?
I have to chime in. We've actually run out of time. Thank you so much for calling.
Yeah.
Right. Another big news for Africa this week, but buried under other headlines, has been of 8 African countries pledging to deliver their share of emission cuts needed to meet the Paris Agreement targets to limit climate change. That means that these 8 cities, from Accra to Dar es Salaam, will strive to become zero-carbon city economies by 2050, with climate-changing emissions eliminated or drastically reduced, and any small remaining emissions to offset by other green actions. Achieving the aim will require significant work. Now, according to the World Bank, of the top 10 big cities with the lowest climate-changing emissions, only one, that is Johannesburg, is in Africa. Besides Accra, Tshwane, and Dar es Salaam, other African cities that have signed the new pledge include Addis Ababa, Lagos, Dakar, Cape Town, Durban, and Johannesburg. Now, Kamo, obviously, one question that comes to mind here is: do we meet given the demographics of this country, do we meet that sort of cosmopolitan element to actually be able to actually meet these sort of requirements? Because we're not as I said, we're not as cosmopolitan as some of these European countries.
I suppose that's why the timeline is so long. 2050 is still a bit far off, and a lot of work obviously needs to go into what these cities are going to be doing. For one thing, they need to convince the masses that they need to change the way they do things. If I'm using a car every day by myself, why don't I carpool? Certain things like that. So it's going to take a lot of work from the 4 cities, or all the 8 cities in the continent, to convince the people that you need to change the way that you live your life.
Right.
It really has to be a drastic way if we are going to meet the target by 2050. As on the issue of whether we are cosmopolitan enough for that, well, do we really need to be cosmopolitan, or do we just need the basic thing, which is to start reducing, to start living more greener lives.
All right.
Yeah.
Particularly in light of the social factors. But unfortunately, that about does it for today. We've run out of time. Lindogut, thank you so much for coming. Gama, thank you so much for taking your time. Thank you so much. And that's how we wrap up this week's edition of What's Not Making Headlines. For myself, Thabo Baloyi, and my guest in the studio is bye for now. Thanks for watching.